Coronation Street star Mikey North has exclusively revealed to Inside Soap that there are still feelings there between his character Gary Windass and Gary's ex-girlfriend Sarah Platt. Since Sarah called in Gary to help her cover up Theo's murder, the former couple have worked as a team to hide their secret. However, their rekindled closeness was soon noticed by Gary's wife, Maria, who later publicly accused the pair of conducting an affair. Sarah and Gary debunked the explosive claim, but Sarah was forced to confess all weeks later, when her police officer boyfriend Kit popped the question. Sick with guilt, Sarah admitted that she was responsible for offing Theo, and that Gary was her first port of call after his death. Kit was both infuriated and heartbroken by the revelation, and according to Mikey North, the feud between Gary and the corrupt cop will ramp up in the coming weeks. Gary hates the law, so any authority, he'll just rebel against it, he explained. I love the way that Gary always calls Kit, officer. The actor continued, there's a lot to come over the next few weeks with Gary and Kit, but it's nice that the scenes so far have gone down well. I've probably found the stuff with Kit some of my favorite stuff in the whole storyline. There's definitely more to come there. With Sarah due to be arrested for her crime, she and Gary are headed for even more turmoil. But still, Mikey has relished the opportunity to revisit the complex dynamic between the two characters alongside co-star Tina O'Brien, who plays Sarah. We've both said over the years that we were gutted when they broke us up, shared the actor, who first appeared on the street at just 21 years old. Those characters worked well together, and it's funny how whenever we get little bits together again, the reaction is always, we forgot how good Gary and Sarah are together. It's nice to work together again on such a great storyline. And the fact that Gary's had to cover for Sarah shows there are still feelings there in some regard. Gary Windass had spent years convincing himself that the past belonged exactly where it was, behind him. Life on Coronation Street had taught him that old wounds never truly disappeared, but they could be buried beneath work, family responsibilities, and the daily chaos of Weatherfield. At least, that was what he kept telling himself. But as summer settled over the cobbles, everything began to change. Sarah Platt was facing one of the toughest periods of her life. Recent events had left her emotionally drained, friendship strained, and her confidence shaken. She smiled when people expected her to smile, laughed when conversations demanded it, but anyone paying close attention could see the exhaustion behind her eyes. Gary noticed. He always noticed. The two had shared a complicated history, one filled with passion, betrayal, forgiveness, and heartbreak. Years had passed since their romance, yet there remained an invisible thread connecting them, one neither had fully acknowledged. Until now. One quiet morning at the factory, Sarah struggled to concentrate. Invoices piled across her desk while Carla wondered why one of her most dependable employees looked distracted. You all right? Carla asked. I'm fine. You don't look fine. Sarah forced a smile. Just tired. Carla wasn't convinced, but before she could ask another question, Gary walked through the office delivering supplies for a renovation project nearby. Their eyes met. Only for a second. But it was enough. Gary hesitated. You okay? Sarah nodded automatically. I'm good. He knew she wasn't. Later that afternoon, Sarah found herself sitting alone outside Roy's Rolls. The cafe was unusually quiet. Gary arrived carrying 2 coffees. I guessed you'd forgotten lunch again. She laughed. You know me too well. Someone has to. The conversation started casually. Work. Family. The weather. But eventually the silence between them became more meaningful than the words. You don't have to pretend around me, Gary finally said. Sarah looked away. I've just had a rough few weeks. I know. No, you don't. Maybe not. But I know that look. She sighed. I'm tired of being strong all the time. Gary didn't rush to offer advice. Instead, He simply sat beside her. Sometimes that was enough. Meanwhile, Maria couldn't help noticing Gary's recent behavior. He seemed distracted. Quieter. Whenever Sarah entered a room, Gary's attention shifted without him even realizing it. Maria wasn't jealous. Not yet. But she was concerned. One evening she gently asked, "Everything all right?" Gary hesitated. "Yeah. You've been miles away." "Just thinking." "About what?" He paused. "Life." Maria accepted the answer. But she wasn't convinced. The following week brought another crisis for Sarah. A misunderstanding at work escalated into a heated argument, leaving her questioning everything. Feeling overwhelmed, she wandered through Victoria Garden late in the evening. Gary happened to be passing. "What are you doing here?" "Trying to clear my head." "Mind if I join you?" She smiled. "I was hoping you would." The pair walked slowly beneath the trees. For the first time in weeks, Sarah allowed herself to admit how frightened she'd become. "I'm scared I'll keep making mistakes." Gary stopped walking. "You've survived worse." "I don't always feel like I have." He looked directly into her eyes. "You've always been stronger than you believe." Those words hit Sarah harder than she expected. Because they came from someone who truly knew her. Elsewhere, gossip was beginning to spread. Eileen casually mentioned she'd seen Gary and Sarah talking. Sean raised an eyebrow. "They've been spending quite a bit of time together." Todd shrugged. "They're friends." "Maybe. But Weatherfield friendships usually become something else." Within hours the rumors reached nearly every corner of the street. Maria eventually overheard snippets of conversation. She wasn't interested in gossip. But she couldn't ignore it either. That evening she asked Gary directly. "People are saying you're spending a lot of time with Sarah." "We've talked." "Just talked?" "Yes." Maria searched his face. "I believe you." Yet uncertainty lingered. Sarah, meanwhile, remained completely unaware of the whispers. Her focus stayed fixed on rebuilding her life. Still, Gary's support became increasingly important. Whenever something went wrong, Gary was there. Whenever she doubted herself, Gary reminded her who she was. Whenever she felt alone, Gary somehow appeared. It wasn't planned. It simply happened. One rainy evening the pair became trapped inside the cafe as a sudden downpour flooded the street. Roy smiled knowingly. "Looks like you're here for a while." Sarah laughed. Typical. As rain battered the windows, conversation turned nostalgic. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had been different?" Sarah quietly asked. Gary stared into his tea. "Every now and then." "Do you regret us?" He thought carefully before answering. "I regret how we ended." She nodded. "So do I." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Just honest. Across Weatherfield, Maria struggled with growing insecurity. She trusted Gary. But trust didn't erase fear. She confided in Audrey. "Maybe I'm imagining things." Audrey replied thoughtfully. "Sometimes people reconnect because they're healing. And sometimes they realize feelings never disappeared." Those words stayed with Maria all day. Gary himself couldn't ignore the truth forever. Late one evening he sat alone reflecting on everything that had happened. He remembered. Their first date. Their laughter. Their arguments. Their dreams. He'd convinced himself those memories meant nothing anymore. But every conversation with Sarah stirred emotions he'd buried long ago. Feelings he hadn't expected to return. Feelings he wasn't sure he wanted. The turning point came during a charity fundraiser at the Rovers. Music filled the pub. Neighbors laughed. Conversations echoed through every corner. Sarah arrived looking happier than she'd looked in months. Gary noticed immediately. "You seem different. I finally feel like myself again." "I'm glad." She smiled warmly. "I couldn't have done it without you." Those words lingered long after she'd walked away. Later that night, Gary stood outside alone. Sarah followed. Escaping the noise. A little. She leaned beside him. "I wanted to say thank you." "You already did." "No. This time I mean it. You reminded me that I'm not broken." Gary looked at her. "You never were." For a moment neither spoke. The world around them seemed to disappear. The street. The lights. The chatter. Everything faded. Leaving only the two of them. Inside the pub, Maria happened to glance through the window. She saw them talking. Nothing inappropriate. No kiss. No embrace. Just two people sharing a quiet conversation. Yet something about the way Gary looked at Sarah unsettled her. It wasn't desire. It wasn't guilt. It was affection. Real affection. The kind that couldn't easily be hidden. The following morning Gary made an important decision. He met Sarah outside Underworld. "I need to be honest." She looked worried. "What is it?" "I've been trying to ignore something." Sarah remained silent. "I care about you." "I know." "No. I mean." He struggled to find the right words. "I still feel responsible for wanting you to be happy." Sarah smiled gently. "You've always cared. It's more complicated than that." She searched his face. "What are you saying?" Gary took a deep breath. "I don't know exactly. I just know seeing you hurt affects me more than it should." Sarah didn't respond immediately. Instead she looked down at the cobbles. Then back at Gary. "I've felt it too." His heart skipped. "But not the way people might think." He frowned slightly. "You remind me of a chapter of my life that wasn't perfect, but it was real." Gary nodded. "I understand. I don't want to go backwards." "Neither do I. But I'm grateful you're here." He smiled. "So am I." What neither of them realized was that someone had overheard part of their conversation. David. Naturally, he confronted Sarah later. "So, what's going on with Gary?" She sighed. "Nothing. Weatherfield never has nothing. We're friends." "You sure?" She laughed. "Completely." David wasn't convinced. Maria eventually sat down with Gary that evening. "I need the truth." "You deserve it." "Do you still have feelings for Sarah?" Gary remained silent for several seconds. Finally he answered. "I'll always care about her." Maria nodded slowly. "That's not what I asked." He closed his eyes. "I don't want to hurt you, Gary. I think a part of me will always love the person Sarah used to be." Maria absorbed every word. "But that doesn't mean I want my old life back. And the Sarah she is now." Gary smiled sadly. "I want her to be happy. Even if that's with someone else." Maria studied him carefully. She could hear the sincerity in his voice. Days later Sarah unexpectedly received encouraging news that promised a fresh start. The difficult months finally seemed to be ending. As she celebrated with friends and family, Gary watched quietly from across the street. Maria stood beside him. "You okay?" He smiled. "Yeah. I really am. You still care." "I always will." Maria squeezed his hand. That's allowed. Gary nodded. But some feelings belong in the past. As the evening sun settled over Coronation Street, Sarah caught Gary's eye from across the cobbles. She smiled. He smiled back. No dramatic declarations. No passionate reunion. No shocking affair. Just mutual respect. Shared history. And an understanding that some people leave permanent marks on our hearts without being our future. For Gary, his feelings for Sarah were real. Not because he wanted to relive yesterday. But because certain connections never completely disappear. For Sarah, Gary represented strength during a time when she had forgotten her own. Their bond had changed. It had matured. And while romance remained firmly in the past, the emotional truth between them became impossible to deny. On Coronation Street, where secrets, betrayals, and unexpected twists are part of everyday life, Gary's confession wasn't about reigniting an old romance. It was about finally admitting that caring deeply for someone doesn't always mean wanting them back. Sometimes, it simply means wanting them to find peace. And on the cobbles of Weatherfield, that quiet revelation proved every bit as powerful as the biggest soap shock. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Crown ST.